Are you lost too, mister? The tiny voice floated up like a fragile bubble in the noisy airport. Armin Hale, the CEO known for his storm-gray eyes and colder silence, glanced down. A little girl, no more than 7, stood beside him with a pink backpack shaped like a rabbit. Her hair was slightly messy, her cheeks warm and flushed, and her eyes impossibly big and sincere. Lost. If only she knew how accurate that word was. Armin had spent the last 3 hours pacing Terminal B, trying to ignore the message that shattered his morning. Your presence is no longer needed at the final board vote. The polite phrasing couldn't hide the truth. He was being pushed out of the company he'd built. I'm not lost, he said, straightening his coat. Just waiting. The girl blinked. Waiting is also being lost, but only a little. Before he could respond, she carefully slid her tiny suitcase next to his briefcase, as though declaring him her chosen companion. My name is Myra, she announced proudly. I can help you if you're lost. I help my mom all the time. Armin almost smiled. Almost. And where is your mom? Myra pointed to a check-in line far behind them. A woman stood there, flustered, juggling papers and talking hurriedly to an agent. The line was barely moving. Myra sighed dramatically. She told me to stay close, but she also told me not to make friends with strangers. But you don't look like a stranger. She leaned closer. You look sad. Sad people are never strangers. The words struck him harder than he expected. I'm fine, he replied quietly. No, you're not, she said, matter-of-fact. Your eyes look like when the sky is tired of holding rain. He looked away. He had never been read so accurately. Not by his board, not by his friends, not even by the woman who had once promised she loved him. Before he could answer, Myra tugged on his sleeve. Mr. CEO. He stiffened. How do you know that? She shrugged as though it was obvious. Your bag tag says Hale Industries. My mom uses your machines at her office. And only important buses have faces like yours. Faces like mine? Myra nodded. Busy but lonely. Something inside Armin cracked in a way he didn't understand. Before he could speak, an announcement echoed. Flight 92 to Vienna is delayed by 3 hours. Myra groaned. 3 hours. That's like forever in kid time. She plopped onto the seat beside him and swung her legs. What are you waiting for? A vote, he answered without thinking. A decision. Something important. Is it about your future? She asked gently. Yes. Are you scared? He hesitated, because the truth was yes. Terrified, even. A little, he admitted. Then we're the same, Myra whispered. I'm scared of flying. I pretend I'm not, but my tummy makes storms. She pressed a hand to her stomach for emphasis. For the first time in weeks, Armin felt laughter tug at him. Real, unforced, warm. Maybe, he said slowly, we're both waiting for something that feels bigger than us. Exactly. Myra exclaimed. And when that happens, we should never wait alone. Armin didn't know how a child could sound so certain. But he didn't push her away. Instead, he found himself talking, really talking, as though the weight pressing on his chest had finally cracked open. She listened like no one ever had. Not interrupting, not judging, not pretending to understand. Just present. Her feet continued to swing, hitting the chair gently, counting some silent rhythm. Then she asked quietly, Do you want to do something brave with me while we wait? He blinked. Brave. Myra nodded. Yes. Brave things make the scary things smaller. His voice lowered. What kind of brave thing? She grinned mischievously, then hopped off the seat and held out her tiny hand. We're going on a quest. A quest? He raised an eyebrow. Yes. A very important airport quest. She tapped his hand again. You coming, mister? Armin stared at her, at the child who had barged through his loneliness like sunlight through a cracked window. Something warm and unfamiliar tugged at him, pulling him out of his thoughts, out of his grief, out of the version of himself he had been drowning in. And without knowing why, he stood. Myra beamed. Good. First task, follow me carefully. She marched ahead, her rabbit backpack bouncing, weaving through people with surprising confidence. Armin followed, amused and strangely relieved to be pulled into her world. She led him toward the giant display screens, then turned dramatically. Okay. What does your heart want to do right now?
Armin frowned. My heart.
Yes, she insisted.
Not your brain. Grown-ups use their brains too much. That's why they get lost.
Armin stared at the glowing board of destinations, cities he had flown to for deals, mergers, conferences, negotiations, but none of them felt like anywhere he wanted to be.
Myra watched him quietly.
If you could go anywhere, not for work, not for people, just for you, where would you go?
He inhaled slowly.
For the first time since receiving the devastating text, he gave himself permission to think. But before he could answer, someone shouted from behind. Myra! The voice shook, breaking with fear.
Armin turned sharply.
Myra's mother was sprinting toward them, panic carved into every feature. People stepped aside as she rushed, breathless, trembling, her eyes burning with worry as she reached her daughter and grabbed her into a frantic hug. And Armin froze, because the moment he saw her face, something in his chest shifted violently. She held Myra so tightly that the little girl squeaked, her tiny arms wrapping around her mother's neck with the same softness she had shown him just minutes earlier.
But it wasn't Myra he was staring at, it was the woman herself.
Her eyes, wide, deep, and shaken, met his for a second. Long enough for him to notice the way relief washed through them, turning fear into something fragile and grateful. Her breath trembled as she steadied herself, brushing Myra's hair back with shaking hands. Myra, she whispered, voice raw. I told you to stay close.
Don't ever run off like that.
You scared me. I wasn't running off, Myra protested, pointing at Armin as if introducing a friend she'd known forever.
I found him.
He was lost. Her mother blinked, confused, then looked at him again. A soft wrinkle formed between her brows, recognition, maybe, or surprise, or the instinctive caution of a mother guarding her child. Armin straightened, unsure why he suddenly felt self-conscious. I'm sorry, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. She wasn't any trouble. She just talked to me while she waited. Myra's mother closed her eyes briefly, exhaling a slow breath. Thank you for keeping an eye on her.
Airports are overwhelming.
Her accent was gentle, her tone warm even through her fear. She was beautiful in that quiet, unintentional way. No makeup, no polished elegance, just soft determination in her posture and exhaustion in her eyes. The type of person who was used to doing too much alone. But there was something else he noticed, something almost startling. She looked at him like he was human. Not a CEO. Not a man with a reputation. Not someone powerful or intimidating. Just a man who happened to be standing near her daughter. Myra tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom, this is the important boss I told you about. The one with the storm eyes. Her mother's eyebrows shot up. Storm eyes. Then she seemed to understand and let out a small, embarrassed laugh. Myra likes naming people. But before she could say anything more, a sudden, metallic crash echoed from behind the check-in counters, luggage tumbling, a cart tipping. People turned. The noise startled Myra, who clung to her mother's leg. Her mother knelt and held her, whispering something soothing. Armin watched the way she steadied Myra with her presence alone, the way her touch softened, the way her voice became an anchor. And something inside him tightened, a longing he hadn't felt in years. Then Myra looked up at him again. Mom, he was going on a quest with me. Her mother stood, brushing dust from her knees. A quest. Myra nodded enthusiastically. A heart quest. She turned to Armin. Tell her. He cleared his throat. She asked me what my heart wanted. Her mother paused. Really paused. As though those words landed somewhere inside her she hadn't touched in a long time. That sounds like something Myra would say, she murmured. She asks me the same questions. Usually when I'm not ready for them. Myra beamed. Because grown-ups forget. Her mother touched her cheek gently, then looked back at Armin. Thank you. Most people would ignore a child asking strange questions. It didn't feel strange, he said quietly. It felt necessary. Her eyes softened. A brief silence passed, not awkward, not rushed. Just full. The kind that feels like the beginning of something neither person can name yet. Mom, Myra said suddenly, tugging her hand, can he stay with us until the plane comes? Please. He's lonely. Armin felt heat rise to his face. Myra's mother looked mortified. Myra, she whispered, you can't say things like that. But he is. Myra insisted. He told me his heart is scared. Her mother looked at him, startled by the unexpected vulnerability her daughter revealed.
But she wasn't judging.
If anything, there was understanding in the way her eyes softened further, like she recognized that fear too well.
Armin found himself clearing his throat again. It's all right. She's perceptive.
Myra's mother exhaled. Her name is Liana. She hesitated, then offered a polite, somewhat shy smile.
I'm Liana. Armin, he replied.
Armin Hale.
Liana froze. Hale? As in?
Yes.
He didn't need her to finish.
Her lips parted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. Not awe, not fear, just recognition. I see. But for the first time in years, the name didn't feel like a shield.
Or armor. Or the heavy crown he'd been forced to wear.
It felt irrelevant. In front of her, it was simply a label, not a definition. A silence followed, gentle and curious. Then Liana said softly, Well, we have at least 3 hours to wait. And Myra seems very taken with you. She looked down at her daughter, who nodded enthusiastically as if sealing a deal. If you'd like to sit with us, Liana continued, you're welcome.
Armin didn't know why the offer hit him so hard. Perhaps because nobody had invited him into their space without wanting something in return.
Perhaps because something about Liana's eyes made him feel seen in a way he hadn't felt in years. Or perhaps because Myra, with her messy hair and brave little heart, had cracked open a door inside him he didn't know was still there.
I'd like that, he said quietly.
They walked back to the seating area together. Myra skipped between them, holding both their hands, humming a tune only she understood. Liana glanced at Armin, a faint smile tugging at her lips. He felt something shift in the air, not dramatic, not cosmic, just right. When they sat, Liana placed her bag down and looked at him. So, what was your heart trying to tell you at the screen? Armin inhaled slowly, eyes drifting to the windows where planes glided along the runways like silver birds searching for somewhere safe to land.
I'm not sure, he said.
But for the first time in a long while, I want to listen. Liana held his gaze, something unreadable flickering there. Myra leaned against him, her head resting comfortably on his arm as though she'd known him for years. That's good, she said sleepily. Because hearts get quiet when nobody listens. Her voice softened, drifting like she was falling into a small, tired dream. But you're listening now. Armin felt her breath slow, her tiny hand gripping his sleeve gently. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something shift inside him. A beginning. A warmth. A direction he hadn't known he was missing. And as Liana watched him with quiet curiosity, the airport noise fading into a distant hum, Armin Hale realized.
He wasn't lost anymore.
The soft rise and fall of Myra's breathing grounded him in a way he didn't expect. Her head, warm and feather-light against his arm, felt like an anchor gently dropped into calm water. Liana adjusted the strap of her bag and offered him a small, almost apologetic smile, as if embarrassed that her daughter had claimed him so easily. She does this, Liana whispered. Attaches herself to people she trusts. He looked down at the tiny hand curled over his sleeve. She trusts very quickly. No, Liana corrected gently. She trusts deeply. There's a difference. It's rarer. Something in her tone made him glance at her more closely. There was history in it, quiet, bruised history she didn't talk about. The kind of pain that shapes someone carefully, molding strength around something once fragile. Armin lowered his voice. And you? Do you trust easily? Liana blinked, caught off guard. Her breath stilled for a moment, then eased out slowly. No, she admitted. Life taught me to be cautious. He nodded. I understand that. The noise of the terminal blended into a soft blur around them. Liana tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, glancing at Myra, then at him. You seemed far away when I found her with you. Not confused. More like you were somewhere inside your own head. He didn't look away. I was. Something troubling you? He almost laughed. The question was simple, but her sincerity made it heavy, made it matter. No one asked him things like that without an agenda. Yet here she was, a stranger who owed him nothing, offering concern without expectation. Yes, he said quietly. Something's troubling me, but I'm not sure how to talk about it. Liana nodded once, accepting the boundary without prying. You don't have to explain. Sometimes sharing the silence is enough.
Her words wrapped around him gently, and he felt himself exhale a breath he didn't know he was holding. She wasn't demanding, wasn't leaning in to dissect him. She was simply there, offering presence without pressure. Myra stirred slightly, muttering something in her sleep. Liana reached over and brushed her daughter's hair with a soft, practiced touch. She tires herself out with all her questions. Her mind never stops moving. She's extraordinary, Armin murmured.
She is.
Pride and exhaustion both lived in Liana's voice.
You seem like a very good mother.
She hesitated, so subtly most people wouldn't notice. But he did. I try, she said softly.
Some days, trying has to be enough.
He wanted to ask what she meant, but he sensed it wasn't the right moment. Instead, he offered something gentler.
You're doing better than you think. Liana looked at him with surprise in her eyes, soft, warm surprise that hinted nobody told her that often, if ever. A faint smile curved her lips, small but sincere.
Thank you, she said quietly.
A silence followed, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding from two people who didn't expect to meet anyone who would understand them today. A chime echoed through the terminal, followed by the low rumble of an announcement. A gate change for another flight. The shuffle of restless passengers. The distant hum of rolling suitcases. Myra's head slipped slightly from his arm, and he adjusted carefully so she wouldn't wake. When he did, his shoulder brushed against Liana's. Not forcefully, just a feather-light touch. She tensed for a fraction of a second, then relaxed as though she realized it wasn't a mistake worth pulling away from.
Liana lowered her voice.
You're surprisingly gentle for someone who looks so intimidating.
He raised an eyebrow.
Intimidating?
Well, her smile tugged wider. Tall. Sharp jaw. Expensive suit.
Eyes that look like they've seen too much.
She paused.
People like you usually keep a distance. People like me. She held his gaze, steady and calm. People who've been alone for too long. The words struck deeper than he expected.
I didn't choose to be alone, he murmured.
It just happened.
It always does, Liana said softly. Loneliness isn't something people pick.
It just grows in the spaces where life becomes too heavy.
He stared at her.
You sound like someone who knows. For the first time, she looked away, not out of dismissal, but because his words touched something personal.
She nodded once. Yes. I know. He didn't push. He didn't need to. Her voice told him everything words didn't.
Myra shifted again, curling closer into his side, her fingers still anchored to him. Liana watched the way her daughter leaned into him with complete trust.
She doesn't do that with strangers, she said softly.
Armin looked down at the little girl's peaceful face. She didn't see a stranger.
No, Liana agreed quietly.
She saw someone who needed a hand to hold. His throat tightened, unexpectedly.
Liana traced her thumb along Myra's arm absently. She feels things deeply.
She reads emotions like other kids read picture books.
Armin swallowed. She saw right through me.
She tends to, Liana whispered.
And she doesn't open like this unless, her voice faded.
Unless. Liana hesitated, then finished, soft, honest. Unless she senses someone safe.
The word wrapped around him like a warm blanket he wasn't prepared to accept. Safe.
He had been called many things in his life, ruthless, brilliant, impossible, relentless. But never safe. Never someone a child could fall asleep against without fear. Something shifted between them, not dramatic, not romantic, but deeply human. A quiet recognition that, somehow, despite the chaos in both their lives, they had found a brief moment of calm in each other's presence.
After a while, Liana spoke again.
So, if your heart had answered her question earlier, where it wants to go, what would it have said? Armin glanced at the departure board in the distance, then at Myra sleeping soundly against him, then at Liana watching him with gentle curiosity.
I'm not sure the place matters, he said softly.
I think my heart wanted to stop running.
Liana breathed out slowly.
Not a sigh, more like a release. That's a hard thing for people to admit. It's harder when you didn't know you were running.
She nodded, understanding.
Until someone small and fearless pointed it out.
His lips curved.
Yes. Myra murmured dreamily, her fingers tightening around his sleeve. Liana adjusted the blanket from her bag and draped it over her daughter, and Armin, without hesitation. He glanced at her,
surprised. You'll catch a chill, she said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her hand lingered near his arm for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Outside the tall glass windows, a plane lifted into the sky, smooth, steady, unhurried, cutting through clouds like a promise. Inside, Armin felt something loosening in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. Not certainty, not clarity, but possibility. And it was enough to make him breathe differently. He didn't know where his career was heading now. He didn't know what the board would decide. He didn't know how long this moment with Liana and Myra would last. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't afraid. Myra's breathing settled into an even softer rhythm, her small face tucked peacefully against his arm as though it was the most natural pillow in the world. Liana watched her daughter a moment longer, confirming she was fully asleep, before sitting back slightly, though not far enough to break the quiet closeness that had formed between them. The blanket draped over Armin's shoulder felt oddly intimate, a gesture he wasn't accustomed to receiving. He wasn't a man strangers comforted. Yet somehow, nothing about it felt strange. Liana's voice broke the silence, low and contemplative. She doesn't fall asleep in noisy places usually. She fights it until the world quiets down. Armin looked at Myra, the tiny hand still curled trustingly around his sleeve. Maybe she felt quiet here. Liana glanced at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand why. Quiet isn't something we've had much lately, she admitted, the faintest tremor in her tone. Life's been loud. He sensed layers behind those words, layers she wasn't ready to unfold yet. Struggle. Worry. Exhaustion pressed into her shoulders and softened her voice. He'd seen the same weight on the faces of single parents at charity events he donated to but never engaged with personally. Now it wasn't a statistic or a concept. It was sitting beside him. You're doing a lot on your own, aren't you? He asked gently. Her jaw tightened for a second before relaxing. I am, she said. But complaining doesn't make the load lighter. No, he agreed. But sharing it might. Liana looked at him with that same startled softness he'd seen earlier, as though she wasn't used to anyone offering her room to lean. She exhaled slowly. I'm not used to people asking how I'm doing. I'm usually the one who has to stay strong for Myra. You don't have to be strong right now, he said, surprising even himself with the certainty in his voice. Not with me. She blinked, absorbing his words carefully. You say that like you know what it feels like to carry everything alone. He rested his free hand on his knee, fingers curling slightly. Because I do. I've been alone in crowded rooms my whole life. Surrounded by people, but unseen. Liana's gaze softened further. You look like someone people expect strength from. Maybe they forget to ask if you're okay. He swallowed. No one asks. Well, she murmured, her voice a warm whisper, I'm asking. This time, he couldn't hold her gaze. He wasn't used to the weight of simple kindness. It felt unfamiliar, almost frightening in its gentleness. His shoulders relaxed despite himself. I'm not okay, he admitted quietly. Not today. Liana didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She simply absorbed the truth with calm acceptance. Then today isn't the end of anything, she said. It's just one hard moment. Moments pass. He stared at her. No board member had ever offered him words that felt like shelter. No colleague had spoken to him with that kind of grounded steadiness. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't rush to fill the silence. She let the moment breathe. A voice crackled over the terminal speakers, another delay announcement. A collective groan rippled through nearby passengers. Myra didn't stir. She only tightened her grip on his sleeve, like her little hand was stitching him into the moment. Liana shifted closer, her shoulder brushing his again. She feels safe with you, she whispered, almost as though confessing a secret. Armin looked at the child leaning against him, then at the woman who trusted him enough to let this happen. I'm glad, he said, the words soft, raw. I don't think I've ever made someone feel safe before. You'd be surprised, Liana replied. People like you, people who carry the world so quietly, are often the safest when they choose to be. He wondered whether she realized how deeply her words sank into him. Probably not. She seemed like someone who didn't know her own power. Myra murmured again, her dream voice soft. Liana smiled faintly. She does that when she dreams about airports. She's always afraid something will go wrong. She didn't seem afraid today, Armin said. No, Liana agreed.
Because she found you. A warmth spread through him. Unexpected, unfamiliar.
It wasn't pride. It wasn't ego.
It was something softer.
Something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe ever. She's incredible, he said. Liana nodded. She is. But she's also sensitive. She picks up on my stress. On everything I try to hide.
Armin hesitated, then asked in a voice low enough not to disturb Myra. What are you hiding now?
Liana didn't answer immediately.
Instead, she gently moved a strand of hair from Myra's forehead, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. Just the truth that I'm scared all the time.
Of failing her.
Of not being enough.
Her voice cracked before she steadied it.
Of the future.
Armin's chest tightened.
He didn't know how to comfort someone who carried fear like a second heartbeat.
But he wanted to. More than he'd wanted anything in a long time.
You're more than enough, he said quietly, firmly. Anyone can see that.
Liana looked at him, eyes glassy but steady.
I don't know why you're being so kind to me. Because, he said, someone should be. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching.
She didn't speak, but she didn't need to.
The moment between them thickened, gentle, electric, unspoken. She lifted her hand, hesitated, then slowly rested it on Myra's back, and his arm beneath it.
A silent thank you. A silent trust.
Armin felt the weight of both their hands, and something inside him shifted again. A feeling like purpose, like meaning, like belonging he hadn't realized he was starving for. The airport lights shimmered overhead. A soft hum of conversation surrounded them. Through the tall windows, another plane lifted into the sky, climbing through clouds towards someplace new. Liana spoke again, her voice steady but fragile. Armin, whatever you're going through, whatever feels heavy, she paused, choosing her words carefully. You don't have to face it alone tonight.
His breath caught. Her eyes held his, warm and sure.
For now, she whispered, you can stay right here.
The next hour passed in a quiet rhythm neither of them tried to break.
The airport moved around them. Announcements, soft footsteps, rolling suitcases. But inside that small circle of seats, time felt slower, gentler, as if the world had paused to let something fragile take root. Liana shifted slightly so Myra's head rested more comfortably on Armin's arm, and when her fingers brushed his wrist, he felt the warmth long after her touch had gone.
He didn't know why it mattered so much.
Why this moment, these two strangers, felt like an anchor dropped into the drifting tide of his life. Maybe because everything else had crumbled today. Maybe because, for the first time, someone saw him without the armor. Or maybe it was because Myra, in all her innocent certainty, had pointed him towards something he hadn't realized he needed. Liana broke the silence first, her voice soft. You still haven't told me what happened today.
He took a slow breath. He hadn't planned to tell anyone. He hadn't even processed it himself.
But something about her presence made honesty feel less like vulnerability and more like release.
The board is voting without me, he said.
A decision about my future, my company. Liana's eyes widened with quiet empathy.
And they didn't want you there. No, he said bitterly.
They wanted control. They don't think they need me anymore. Her gaze held steady.
And do you need them?
The question hit him like a sudden gust of cold air.
No one had asked him that.
No one ever considered that he might have needs, choices, or dreams beyond responsibility.
I don't know, he whispered. I've spent my whole life building that company.
It became who I was.
And who are you without it? She asked softly. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth scared him more than losing his title.
Without Hale Industries, who was he?
A man without purpose? Without direction? Without identity? Liana sensed the storm inside him. She leaned closer, her shoulder brushing his lightly. Maybe you're someone who deserves more than a boardroom.
Maybe you're someone who's allowed to start over. He looked at her, the weight in his chest shifting again. You talk like you've had to start over too.
I have, she replied. More times than I can count. But every time I fell apart, life gave me something better to build with. Sometimes endings aren't endings.
They are beginnings wearing scary masks. Her words settled over him like warm light. He didn't respond, but she didn't need him to.
She simply let the silence stretch, gentle and understanding.
A small vibration buzzed in his coat pocket.
His phone. He stared at it with dread pooling in his stomach. The board vote.
The results. Everything he'd poured himself into,
his sacrifices, his sleepless nights, his relentless drive, summed up in a single message. Liana watched him hesitate.
Do you want to know?
I don't know, he admitted. Then don't look, she said. Not until you're ready.
Not until you've decided what you want your life to look like, with or without them.
He swallowed hard.
I've never hesitated over a decision in my life.
Then maybe, she murmured, this one matters in a different way. He looked at her, really looked at her. The soft strength in her eyes. The way she held Myra protectively. The quiet resilience in the way she carried her worries. She wasn't polished or poised like the people he usually worked with. She wasn't wrapped in ambition or pretense. She was real. Grounded. Human.
And she had given him something no one had in years, space to breathe.
He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Liana let out a breath she'd been holding for him. Good. A soft rustle made them both turn.
Myra stirred awake, blinking up at Armin with drowsy confusion.
Did the quest finish? She asked sleepily.
Armin smiled, genuinely, without effort.
Not yet. Myra yawned.
Then we keep doing it. Brave people don't stop in the middle.
His heart tightened.
No, he whispered, they don't.
Liana smoothed the blanket over her daughter.
Our flight should board soon, she said gently, though her eyes lingered on him longer than necessary, as if reluctant to break whatever had formed between them.
Something inside him panicked at the thought of them leaving. It was irrational. Absurd. He had known them for only a few hours.
Yet the idea of them walking away felt like losing something he'd never get back.
Myra sat up straighter.
When we reach Vienna, can we see you again? Armin inhaled sharply, unprepared for the question.
Liana looked at him, startled but silent. He cleared his throat.
I don't know if I'll be in Vienna.
Myra frowned. But you can come if your heart wants. That's what I told you. He laughed softly. Yes, you did. Liana looked both amused and apologetic.
Myra?
No, Armin said gently. She's right. Liana froze. He continued, voice steady.
For the first time, I'm thinking about going somewhere not because I'm required to, but because I want to. He stood slowly, careful not to jostle Myra, and walked toward the massive departure board visible from their seats. Rows of destinations flickered before him, cities he'd flown to for deals, negotiations, mergers.
None of them had ever felt like possibility. Until now.
Liana approached beside him, Myra holding her hand. Armin, Liana whispered, you don't have to make a choice because of us.
I'm not, he said softly.
I'm making it because of me.
For a long moment, they stood together, watching flights depart toward horizons filled with unknowns.
Armin felt the weight of the moment, of choosing direction instead of obligation. He looked down at Myra, her small hand reaching toward him again, trusting and hopeful.
You asked me what my heart wants, he said. Myra nodded, wide-eyed.
He exhaled, the truth settling over him like a sunrise breaking through storm clouds. My heart wants to go with you.
Liana's breath caught.
Before she could respond, the speakers chimed overhead. Final call for Flight 92 to Vienna.
Passengers rushed around them, but the world between the three of them felt eerily still.
Armin turned to Liana, searching her eyes for fear, hesitation, rejection. Instead, he found something that made his knees weak. Hope. Silent, fragile, but real. Myra squeezed both their hands and whispered, See? Hearts always know. Liana let out a soft, trembling breath. Are you sure? He looked at her, at the woman who had shown him gentleness, honesty, and a glimpse of a life rooted in something deeper than ambition.
Yes, he said. I'm sure. For the first time in years, Armin Hale didn't choose the path that made sense. He chose the one that made him feel alive.
And together, hand in hand with a little girl who believed in quests and courage, he stepped toward a new beginning, one he never saw coming, one born from the unexpected kindness of a stranger, the fierce heart of a child, and the quiet spark of something that felt a lot like fate. Their flight wasn't just a destination. It was the start of something extraordinary. And Armin walked toward it with a heart no longer lost.